All right, in this one, we're going to take a look at manipulating objects and how to move them, scale them, and rotate them. So this is really, really cool. Obviously, this is a big part of Blender, but the first thing that we can do is move our objects. And for that, we're going to be using shortcut keys because shortcut keys are very, very useful. They allow for you to do things much faster than doing it in a more manual way. So the shortcut key to move an object is first you have to select it. To select it, you could just left click it. So let's left click or select the cube. And then we're going to hit the G key. And this is going to allow for us to move or grab our cube. Pretty cool. Now we could right click and that will not confirm the movement. Or if we hit G and move it and left click, that will confirm the movement. So you can see that now the cube is over here. And once again, I could hit the G key to grab it. And if I right click, it will not move it or not confirm the movement. And if I left click, it will confirm the movement. So that's grabbing, the G key. Next is rotating, which is the R key. So if I hit the R key, you can see that it will rotate our cube. Once again, I could right click to not confirm it or left click to confirm it. Then we have S to scale our cube. So if I hit the S key, it will scale it. Once again, right click will not confirm it, and left click will confirm the scaling. So again, G to grab, R to rotate, and S to scale. Very, very cool. Now, just like always, there are many ways that we could do this. For example, we could go over here. If I hit the T key, you could see that it brings up the tool shelf over here. I'm going to go so that I have a double-sided arrow and expand this out so that I can see the names of these. And you can see that we have a move, rotate, and scale widget right here. Right now it's set to the select box, meaning that if I left click, it will select items. If I change this to the move box or the move widget, you can see that now we have this widget on our cube, which allows for us to move our cube. Right here, you can see that we have the X, Y, and Z axis. So here, if I move this, I can move it along a particular axis. Or if I click in the middle, I could just grab it and move it in whichever way I want. Now, we could also do this with shortcut keys to move it in a particular axis instead of using this widget. Honestly, I never use these widgets and most people never really use them, maybe from time to time, but it's much easier with shortcut keys. So how can we move this with shortcut keys along the X, Y, and Z axis? Well, we could just hit G and X and it will move it along that axis. How awesome is that? Or we could hit G and Z and it will move it along there, or G and Y and it will move it along there. Now you could change the axes in the middle of the moving. So if I hit G and X, I could then just hit Z or Y and it will change it to that right away. How awesome is that? Now over here you can see that we also have these panels, and this will allow for us to exclude that axis. So if we want to move it on just the Z and the Y, we could select the red right here, which will exclude the X axis. So if I select this, you can see that's moving it just on the Z and the Y. If I select the blue right here, it will move it on just the X and Y and not the Z or blue axis. And if I select the green panel right here, it will move them on all the axes except the Y axis. Now, once again, we could do this with shortcut keys. If I hit G, and then if I hit Shift Z, it will exclude the Z axis. Shift X will exclude the X axis. And you guessed it, Shift Y will exclude the Y axis. Pretty sweet. Then we have the rotate manipulator. Very, very similar. You can see right here we have the X, Y, and Z axis where we could rotate these around. Now once again, it's much easier and better to do it with shortcut keys. So if we hit R to rotate, we could then hit X, Y, or Z to rotate it along that particular axis. Also, you can see if I left click and drag in the middle here, it will do what's called tumble rotating. So it rotates it in a tumbling style. Whereas if we just hit the R key, it will rotate it from whatever view that we're looking at it in. So if we're looking at it like this, if I hit the R key, it will rotate it from this particular view. But if I left click and drag here, it will tumble rotate it, We could do the same thing with the shortcut key of hitting R, and then hitting R a second time, and we will get the tumble rotation. Awesome. Then we have the scaling, and once again, we could scale it on just the Z, Y, or X, and we could also exclude the X, Z, or Y axis by selecting these panels. And of course, we could do the same thing with shortcut keys by hitting S, Z, Y, or X and scale it along just those axes, or hit S, Shift Z, Shift X, or Shift Y to exclude those axes. Very, very cool. So we could use these, but again, no one really uses these, including myself. Don't really use these as it's not that practical to go in here and move it or scale it with these. You can also select transform right here, which gives you all three of them at once if you really want to overkill it and just have a bunch of widgets right here and yeah, just take up a bunch of space. Again, not very useful, so I'm just going to go back to the select box, but you do have those as an option. Now, another way to move it or change it is if I hit the N key, you can see over here we have our transform properties. You can see we have the location for the X, Y, and Z axis, the rotation for the X, Y, and Z axis, and the scale for the X, Y, and Z axis. You can see here if I left click and drag, I could change the location on the X axis, the Y axis, or the Z axis. And this is really nice because this gives us the ability to get precise location, rotation, or scale. I could do the same for the rotation, the scaling, etc. on all of these axes. Now you can see that right now we have a bunch of random values for all of these. Let's say we want to reset these. Well, we could go ahead and hit Alt G. When I hit Alt G, look at what happens with the location. Right now the location is at these coordinates for the X, Y, and Z. But if I hit Alt G, it will reset it to the location coordinates of 0, which is the default. If I hit Alt R, watch what happens with the rotation values here. Alt R, it will reset it. And you guessed it, Alt S will clear the scale. And so now everything is back to the default scale of 0, 0, and 1. Or not the scale, but the default transform values. Now the scale is not set to 0, it's set to 1, because if you set these to 0, you can see that here, by the way I selected these is if I left click and drag down, I could select all of these and just type in a value. You can see at 0, we don't have anything because there is no cube or it doesn't have any dimension. We could also left click and drag these down and then move our mouse wheel to the left or right to scale this up, or just input a value such as 1. Now let's say we want to move this cube on the X location or X axis by 1 unit. Well, we could click on the X and type in 1, and you can see it's moved it to the right by a value of 1 unit or 1 meter. Let me go ahead and set this back to 0. We could do the same with shortcut keys. If I hit G, X, and then 1, you can see it will move it 1 blender unit or 1 meter to the right. Very cool. Also, if I hit G and move this around, you can see on the top left over here, it will tell you how much it's moving by. So if I hit G and X and move it, you can see on the top left, it's moved it by negative 1.9 meters, as you can see right there. And of course, you could see it here as well. We could do the same thing with the rotation. We could hit S, X, and rotate it 45 degrees. By the way, the rotation is in degrees, so keep that in mind. And the scaling as well, we could hit S2 and scale it up to 2 units right there. And then of course, if we want to reset this, Alt R, Alt G, and Alt S. Very cool. The last thing is applying the transforms of our object. So we could apply the location, rotation, and scaling of our object. Now what does that mean? Well, for example, here if I go ahead and move this over, you can see that this is the location. And if I hit Alt G, it will clear the location and reset it back to its origin. However, if I move this, and let's say I want to make this the new default location for our cube. Well, I could hit Control A and apply the location. What this will do is you can see that these values have been set to 0. And if I hit Alt-G, you can see that our cube is staying here because this is the new default location. If I move the cube, you can see that now if I hit Alt-G, it will reset to here. Pretty cool. Now you could also see one thing is that with our objects or our meshes, we have this little dot right here, which is called the origin point. And this is the point of origin from which the cube is built from. So it's basically, this dictates the location, rotation, and scale, this origin point. Now right now the origin point is not in the center of the cube. So I'm just going to right click, go to set origin, and select origin to geometry so that our origin is right here. And you can see that it's the origin that dictates the location because our cube hasn't actually moved, but the point right here was 0, 0, 0, and now the point being here is these values here. Again, we'll get a little bit more into the origin point and why that is in the next video. And we could do the same for the rotation and scaling. For example, if I go ahead and hit the R key to rotate, you can see that the rotation values change. If I want to set this as the default rotation, I could hit Control A and apply the rotation so that now the rotation values are set to 0 here. And if I hit Alt R, you can see it doesn't do anything because these are now the default rotation values. However, if I rotate it like that, and hit Alt R, you can see that it will rotate it to here now because again, this is the new default rotation. Pretty cool. Also, we can hit Control Z to undo anything that we don't want. So Control Z is the undo shortcut. I'm going to go ahead and undo this so that the rotation is just like this. And we could do the same thing for the scale. If I hit the S key, scale it up. If I hit Control A, apply the scale, you can see that now the scale right here is set to 1. And if I hit Alt S, it doesn't do anything. However, now if I scale it up, it will then go to this new default scale right there. Pretty cool. And then lastly right here, we have the dimensions. Now the dimensions is the actual size of the mesh. You can see that the dimensions here are 6.33 meters on the X, Y, and Z. Because the scale and the dimensions will be or can be different. As right here, obviously, if we apply the scale becomes 1, 1, and 1, but the dimensions or the actual size of our object will be different. So right here, again, you can see that we have a scale of 6.3 meters on all of these axes. We could also change what it's going to be as far as the units. If we go over here to the scene properties, you can see under units, we have it set to metric, but we could set it to imperial to have feet right here. So right here, this cube is 20 feet by 20 feet by 20 feet. I'm just going to leave it to the default of metric right here, but you can change that if you want. So again, make sure to leave that or put that back to metric if you change it, as this will be important moving on. So with that, that is how you manipulate objects. I'll see you in the next one. Ciao for now. Au revoir.